Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, last year on October 25th, I was presenting a keynote speech at the annual meeting of the German Society for Energy and Information Medicine in Wiesbaden with the title Consciousness, Polarity, Experiences and Reflections on the Application in Consciousness Medicine. Of course, this was in German and is already online on my YouTube channel, Meyer-Galow YouTube channel. But my dear friend, Annelie Driesen, who is the founder and the president of the Metaphysical Academy in Vancouver in Victoria on Vancouver Island, was insisting to repeat my speech in English for the English-speaking community because it was her opinion that is so important, maybe worldwide. Thanks to Annelie for the translation of my German transcription. And additionally, Richard Warrington, another friend in Vancouver, supported me as well with additional remarks on the translation. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to this very important conference, examining the ambitious topic of entanglement of science, consciousness, and spirituality. May prove to be a pioneering expedition. I would like to explore which state of consciousness practitioners of energy and information medicine may best cultivate in order to significantly enhance healing. This is my core topic. To me, consciousness medicine means healing which arises from non-objective consciousness. I will elaborate upon this in a moment. One prerequisite for healing is that we foster the understanding in patients that they have an illness, but they are not the illness. What one has, one can get rid of. What one is denotes permanence. Some active agents and/or devices have an immediate effect upon a variety of illnesses. For example, in emergency medicine, intensive care, or medication to heal infections and so on. And that is a good thing. But in chronic diseases, consciousness plays, from my point of view, a significant role. We must, however, never forget that healing is always a fateful act of grace, and that the therapist is the helper on the patient's personal journey towards wholeness, towards initiating and or strengthening the patient's own healing power. So I will talk about consciousness, polarity of consciousness. I will give remarks to what Thomas Campbell, my teacher, thinks about consciousness. Bert Stephan, a researcher on gene expressions. My first teacher, Karl-Fried Graf Dürkheim. My spiritual teacher, Williges Jäger. My teacher for analytical psychology or depth psychology, Walter Schwery. He is a scholar of Carl Gustav Jung. And Hans-Peter Dürr, quantum physicist, my friend, who explained to me what consciousness is from the perspective of quantum physics. And then a conclusion. But there, ladies and gentlemen, there's an important difference between the German and the English version now. In the German version at the conference, I reported about the interview with Eugen Winchevsky, Dr. Eugen Winczewski at the end and did not mention the second interview with a healer who is practicing with information on titanium chips. These two interviews I will put now on the beginning of my speech, showing you that consciousness polarity first in practice, and then my reflections will follow. My dear colleagues, in February last year, my friend Dr. Eugen Winczewski asked me to present this lecture at the annual meeting of the Society of Energy and Information Medicine. He stated that the entanglement of science, consciousness, and spirituality was and is precisely my topic. I agreed. His sudden and unexpected death still in April last year still pains me today and is undoubtedly also a great loss for all of you. On February 20 last year, he proudly showed me his new Japanese cold laser. That evening, I conducted an interview with Eugen about his approach for healing, because I was so impressed for a couple of years when I was understanding and following his healing with many different patients. Today, this conversation, this interview feels like a legacy. So I asked, how do you work with your patients? For example, a brain cancer. You have often told me that healing succeeds in some cases and not in others. You say that it is not you who heals, but the patient heals themselves. Even methods like PAPIMI and electrocancer therapy are only triggers. Healing, however, requires that the patient opens himself and believes in the healing. Eugen answers, I begin with a normal anamnesis and examination. Then I ask the important question, can the patient imagine being healthy? About the imagination for the future? The patient's attitude is very important. How does the patient envision their dream journey into the future? It's about the dream of their life, to tune them toward healing. And this builds trust. I want to see the spark in the patient's eyes. It's about their vision. It helps if they say that they still want to accomplish this or that or an important goal. This distracts them from the diseases. But you must keep your distance. You must not even say the word cancer. Minimizing the problem is helpful. You must not enter their fear or show pity. You have to remove the seriousness and treat the whole situation like a game. Then I explain Nobel laureate Warburg experiences and theories, which means six cells arise from a lack of oxygen. And we are now ensuring that cells receive more oxygen. I sent the image of 6 cells growing slowly while healthy cells multiply, and we work together to support this. After that, I apply everything a natural health practice can offer. Complementary medicine, detoxification, dietary changes, infusions, and so on. Depending on the cancer size, I can estimate when the tumor growth may have started. I ask about experiences during that period of time. And very often the patient says, oh yes, something terribly happened. I then explain the epigenetic influence of diseases. again further on, cancer forms in an acidic environment. And when there is a reduction of oxygen in the cells, there are many causes of cancer. Stress, diet, toxic substances, the psyche, of course. And if cancer cells receive oxygen, they can revert to healthy cells. People want something tangible that they can believe in. Kinesiological support is also helpful, which I practice. And in our practice, we offer a wide range of treatment options. These are like peaceful armies, like electrocancer therapy, ECT. We bombard the opposing armies. That's a good picture. Patients should imagine the cancer cells disintegrating. People respond well to this. Building trust is essential. This also includes quickly relieving pain, of course. Even with all these measures, we are still on the material level. And now it's very important to move beyond the material level. Do nothing, think nothing. I say, I accompany you. I cannot help you, but I know how it works. If there's doubt or mistrust, it doesn't work. The patient must take responsibility for himself. The patient can only heal himself. Handing over responsibility to the doctors and abdicating one's own responsibility is not very helpful. Yet, this is the behavior of the most people of today. Many are fearful, I understand that. I can see it in their eyes. It usually takes 2 or 3 treatments for the patient to become completely relaxed. Often I start with the feet. I focus my consciousness on the message. May this treatment be the best for the patient. May this treatment be the best for the patient. Then you must gain distance. Do not think, do not feel, only observe, only listen. This is very important. It is extremely difficult to enter this, what I call neutral state. My deep grounding in the Christian faith helps me. Humility flows in. This is a higher level of consciousness. In this state, I also receive visions for healing. I contribute. Here is it again. The prerequisite for healing. What I call consciousness polarity. The material state, as you say, is one pole. And the other pole is what you call the neutral state. The material pole I call consciousness reality. The neutral pole, what you call the neutral pole, I call consciousness actuality. Or consciousness reality, actuality. In your treatments, it seems that the consciousness entanglement you achieve for the patient's consciousness remains even after the patient's leaving your office. And Eugen continues, when the patient is completely relaxed and full of trust, they are also, through my impulses, in a higher state of consciousness. This can also be called consciousness entanglement, as a prerequisite for the patient's self-healing. In my patients, however, healing does not succeed. In many patients, however, healing does not always succeed. They are full of fear and mistrust. And then, unfortunately, the progression of the disease becomes faded. It's really always about the flow of information. I transfer information from a space that we cannot even name, let alone understand. It is also about transformation of matter through information. As in phantom surgery, what I practice as well. Everything is already there. We just don't know it. but we can experience it. We can experience it. From this space, we can receive information and allow matter to change. You have to practice this. It's an art. The ability to transmit happens through experience. And at the end of the dialogue with Eugen, I asked Eugen, can you heal all cancer? And he says, can't do nothing at all. I can't do nothing at all. My dear friends and colleagues, before I enter into my reflections, I would like to report on my most recent experiences and let you participate in an interview with another healer, which is, from my point of view, very important. It's another example of information medicine. A colleague uses frequencies to enable the patient to heal himself. And are frequencies not simply energy? According to Max Planck's formula, energy equals H times nu. The relevant frequencies at different areas of the body are determined through pendulum-based anamnesis. With his left hand, he scans an image of the patient from the top to the bottom using a stylus, and the pendulum in the right side oscillates above a frequency table where disturbances are assigned to frequencies. I asked him, are you thinking while you do this? And he said, I don't think anymore. I'm not in the cognitive domain. Otherwise it doesn't work. It just happens. The switching from thinking to not thinking is a difficult part. When I start thinking, the pendulum is blocked immediately. First, you observe, and the mind provides some initial information. And then you simply let it go. Let it happen. There's again what I call consciousness polarity as a means of healing. I call this click-clack, click-clack. Consciousness, reality, consciousness, actuality. Thinking, not thinking. Feeling, not feeling. Doing, not doing. Click-clack. That's what you've got to learn. And the patient will follow. I will explain it later. The healing frequencies are then stored on a titanium chip that is attached to the area treated. I asked further, how do you program the chip? He replied, thinking doesn't work for that either. I give an instruction and then let it go. I don't know why or how it works, but it does. And after procedure, you can measure the frequency of the chip. Again, this is work of consciousness polarity, my dear friends. I ask once more, does the patient need to have an opening of consciousness for self-healing to occur? He said, that's not necessary. I was surprised. The information on the chip acts continuously through the skin on the entire system. It acts, it works. Until now, my impression had been that information transfer via consciousness, ladies and gentlemen, requires the patient's openness for consciousness. But evidently, according to this colleague, this is not always required when the transmission occurs via a frequency chip. Or is it perhaps not the chip itself, but rather the patient's belief in the effect of the chip that activates the healing process? However, as we heard, the healer must shift into actuality of consciousness to program the information onto the chip. Let me mention some examples which he explained to me. First, for instance, allergy treatment. The frequency of the allergen is determined and the inverse frequency is stored on the chip. And then the body no longer recognizes the allergen, and the healing process begins. It's in a period of time of 4 weeks, then the allergy is gone. Second, energy enhancement, amplifying the body's energy to support self-healing by mitochondria activation, very important. Ozone chip, used to increase oxygen levels in cells affected by tumors. Or pH regulation chip, used to raise the pH in tumor tissues. Or electron spin reactivation chip, used to restore proper electron spin in tumor cells. My dear friends, currently I'm in an intensive learning process with this colleague, and in this context we discussed what to call this method. How should we call his method, which I never heard before? And he said you might call it information and interaction balancing. Information and interaction balancing. Okay, good expression. The healing outcomes are impressive, but my knowledge is still relatively rudimentary. I'm still in the learning curve, but I want you to let it know about this method. Now let me come to my reflections. Your honorary president, Hendrik Treugut, asked me to please stand by my commitment to give to this lecture. I thank you very much, dear Hendrik, for this trust and for the recognition that expresses. But above all, I'm grateful for my personal process of insight, which has continued to unfold since the request in February. That is a very precious gift. You have come here to listen. For that, I thank you. I have come here to speak to you and thus to establish a connection, to either create an effect upon you or to reinforce one that may already be reality for some of you. My personal reflections regarding consciousness medicine will not always conform to today's scientific standards, in part due to the absence of formal studies, but they arise from our own experiences. I dare to give this lecture because the tremendous opportunities for healing, which I will address, are overwhelming. We create the conditions that allow the patient to heal himself. And that is what this lecture is about. Resonance medicine is crucial to me, a resonance between physician and patient. And that has everything to do with consciousness. Let me come to consciousness. The word consciousness is used very frequently today, but there is a considerable confusion about the meaning. When you speak about consciousness, we must clearly define what actually mean by it. What is it? What is consciousness? If you read or speak about consciousness, you will notice that many people do not truly know what consciousness is at all, because they are stuck in what is called object-bound consciousness, and live consciously only within this realm. They are constantly searching for consciousness itself and want to know both its nature and where is it located, where is consciousness located. All of our impressions, sensory impressions, are first and foremost consciousness. Frank Niesen, an author, makes the following important points in his book, Spirituality for Head People, or Brain People. I quote, "You perceive sensory impressions from the outer world and experience thoughts and feelings from your inner world. In doing so, you identify yourself as an ego. From the perspective of natural science, our ego does not exist independently of or outside of the brain. Feelings, thoughts, and perceptions are regarded as purely brain-based phenomena, as the result of biochemical and electrical processes in a material organ of the body. Exactly how these processes take place in every detail, and how as a consequence our consciousness arises from the brain, are not yet understood. And perhaps they cannot be understood at all. On the other hand, it's not intuitively obvious that why matter should develop consciousness at all. Philosophically, no clear causality can be derived merely from an observed correlation between brain activity and states of consciousness. It is also theoretically conceivable that consciousness exists outside the brain, but is connected with the brain. The brain could thus be a kind of transmitter or receiver for the contents of consciousness. If consciousness is non-physical, then it cannot be found anywhere in the physical universe. It exists in a realm that has no spatial dimension. This sounds abstract, my dear friends, and is not truly imaginable because it cannot be experienced through the senses. What is non-physical is pure spirit, beyond matter, beyond space, and possibly beyond time. Quote ends. This pure spirit is described with Sat Chit Ananda in the Upanishads, which were composed between 700 and 200 before Christ. Sorry. For Sri Aurobindo, a very wise philosopher, Sat Chit Ananda is an expression of the highest divine reality. Ananda is a description of Brahman. It manifests itself as an infinite being whose essence is consciousness, whose essence again is bliss. Being consciousness, consciousness is bliss. And thus they are inseparable. Not merely inseparable, but so deeply interwoven that they are not different from one another. Quote ends. Okay, so Sat Chit Ananda may be translated in English, being, consciousness, bliss. When one experiences this being through consciousness, it leads to joy, to bliss, the highest form of unconditional happiness. And throughout history, people have attempted to name this realm of pure being, which in truth cannot be named but only experienced, as, for instance, Brahman, God, Allah, higher self, what C.G. Jung said, super spatial temporal being, Durkheim, ever-acting process, what Hans-Peter Dürr says, larger consciousness system, Tom Campbell, emptiness, Buddhism, transcendence, and so on. The experience of these realms is true spirituality. My dear friends and colleagues, after all the numerous differing definitions of consciousness, it's refreshing to hear it explained very simply by Swami Sarvapriyananda. Succeeds in doing the following. First, it's not part of your mind and body, the consciousness. Second, it illuminates your mind and body. Third, it is not limited by your mind and body. Fourth, it's known through the functioning of the mind and body. And fifth, without mind and body, consciousness still exists, but cannot be known. Is it simple? But not easy. After we have understood consciousness to some extent, what then is consciousness polarity? I created this word and was thinking it's unique for my paper here. So I asked ChatGPT, what is consciousness? And ChatGPT says, quote, the term polarity of consciousness is not established in a medical or scientific term, but it's occasionally used in spiritual, psychological, or alternative medicine contexts. It typically describes a dual structure of tension within human consciousness. Here are some aspects. Polarity in consciousness. Light, darkness, good, evil, love, fair, activity, passive, and so on. And second, there is a psychological perspective, what it may be, polarity of consciousness. In psychology, particularly in the work of Carl Gustav Jung, there is the idea of polarities with the self, such as consciousness versus unconscious, or persona versus shadow. And the integration of these opposites, what he calls individuation, is the central goal of personality development. That comes closer to what I mean, but it's not quite perfect. From my point of view, all these definitions are focusing on duality. And that's not what I mean. Duality, however, is defined by two opposing forces, and that is not what I mean. What I mean is polarity, conscious polarity, are two poles of one entity, or one wholeness. So polarity is something entirely different than duality. Polarity, conscious polarity, even may support you to escape out of duality in thinking and behaving. For myself, consciousness polarity describes the two poles of consciousness, object-bound consciousness and non-object-bound consciousness. This polarity plays an essential role in the success of the healing process. I'm very much convinced about that. Well, our common concern is the healing of our fellow beings, of course. When I speak to you and you listen to me, we are all still connected at the level of the object-bound speaking, and the muscles and nerves of my vocal work change. Most of the time, without knowing, we are also connected at the level of non-object-bound consciousness. This is the silence between my words and behind the words. This absolute silence out of which my words arise. So it's also about listening and sensing. And Eckhart Tolle, who was asked one time about how we can experience non-objective consciousness, he replied, okay, quote, when you meditate, thoughts and emotions arise. You observe them and let them go. Then more thoughts and emotions arise, but not immediately after the previous ones. There's a small gap. There's nothing. Quiet and stillness. No thought, no emotion. That is non-object consciousness. I don't know whether the quote is exactly that what Tolle said in words, but it's a meaning. That's what I have in mind, and that's what I explained to you. In meditation, ladies and gentlemen, the task is to cultivate this space of non-objective bound consciousness, making it larger in stillness and accessible at any time, even in everyday life. From Hans-Peter Dürr, the quantum physicist and scholar of Werner Heisenberg, I learned that there is an ever-acting process, which you don't see, which you don't feel, but there is an ever-acting process. This space is empty of objects, but full of information and energy. waiting to be called for. This, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely your process. You have all recognized this enormous potential and are using it already, maybe for healing. This process, therefore, has a growth potential from which matter and energy continually arise as reality, manifest as a reality, again and again. The ever-acting process is as the true actuality, out of which reality, which is not the true actuality, emerges. And this actuality can be experienced. Why do I place these insights at the very beginning of my reflections? Because of the polarity between object-bound and non-object-bound consciousness, which I would now like to call consciousness actuality and consciousness reality. It runs throughout my entire lecture. For me, the recognition, experience, the effect of polarity from the very foundation of what I call consciousness medicine, which consciously or unconsciously applied can be the ideal complement to energy and information medicine. And my question is consciousness medicine in essence not information medicine as well? How can we experience the polarity of consciousness? In our healing work, back and forth the levels of consciousness, actuality and consciousness reality. So there are various entry points, slots, which I will address to you from my teachers. According to my understanding, illness arises from non-object-bound consciousness as a manifestation in object-bound consciousness. Healing is therefore about allowing the impulses and streams of information from the non-object-bound consciousness of both doctor and patient to flow, or to amplify the effect of medications or methods of energy and information medicine through these impulses and information streams. The prerequisite, however, is that both doctor and patient have learned to open themselves to the experience of consciousness actuality. This can also occur, according to my experience, unconsciously in some people as a form of talent or intuition. Illness is a disturbance of communication between cells due to hindered light-inducing signaling. Bruce Lipton, quote, "Cancer begins in the energy field," end quote. Allow me to let Bruce Lipton speak directly about the origin of illness and the maintenance of health, positions with which I fully agree. He points out that every cell has a negative pole on the inside and a positive pole on the outside. Each cell is therefore a kind of battery. 50 trillion cells therefore have enormous voltage and thus enormous energy. And this energy can be used for healing. Signals emanate from this energy, setting proteins in motion. That is life. With fewer signals, you become ill, and with no signals, you're dead. Fewer signals may also be emitted if the proteins are genetically inherited or in a damaged form. But that accounts only, to Lipton's experience, about 5% of the cases. 95% of diseases have an epigenetic origin: trauma, toxins, negative effects. the mechanisms that regulate gene expressions, as do negative thoughts. These are the main causes of illness. Genes are only the blueprint. They do not control the signals. They do not switch on or off. We are therefore not victims of our genetic makeup. Our perception makes the difference. 95% of cancer develop out of perception. You can change your epigenetic control at any time. If you change your perception, you change how your genes are read. Or you can read, it will be read to build proteins in transcriptions. Or, in the negative sense, if you perceive that you have an illness, that illness will develop. The center of control for all cells is your mind. Your brain perceives the signals. The best that medication can achieve is to heal only in part. It is thoughts. Our thoughts are heavily influencing the healing. You may remember the results of the placebo effect. Belief in healing is essential. Fewer signals and your immune system is switched on. That is when illness begins. Through changing perceptions, you can switch your immune system back. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end quote. Ladies and gentlemen, it's crucial that you continuously feed the patient's hippocampus, the gateway for new information with positive content. These are uploaded to the neocortex at night as so-called index neurons. From the neocortex, positive and negative content is continuously downloaded, consciously or unconsciously, and influences our health or illness as sickness. So you see, my dear friends and colleagues, that your work with the Society for Energy and Information Medicine is exactly right, even if many critics in conventional medicine remain more deeply bound to matter. Let me come to Tom Campbell, who is my today's teacher. He is a physicist and a quantum physicist and consciousness researcher. From Tom I learned when I meditate, I have to ask an intention to the larger, what he called the larger consciousness system. This is the space where all information is for the past, for the present, and for the future. For the future, if you ask for the future, you will get a response with the most probability. It was found out when we today talk, live, and do a lot of things, our corpus callosum in the middle of our two brain halves has a frequency of 8 Hertz. The enlightened monks, when they are enlightened, they phase down to a frequency of 4 Hertz. So Monroe found out, and Campbell took over that, if you apply a difference of 4 Hertz at both ears, let's say 36 and 40 for instance, your corpus callosum is swinging with 4 Hertz, and you are in a meditation situation. He calls it, you are in the being state. You are move yourself by doing this with the binaural beats from your intellect level to the being level. Let me explain what Tom Campbell says about healing. He said that illness and healing can be viewed from two sides. If a person is ill, they must continue on their personal path, which is meant to shape them and offer many growth opportunities. You should never interfere with someone who is on the path to illness. They are on their way. Why should you intervene? Of course, we should be compassionate and helpful. When you help others, it's not only helping that person, you also help yourself. You grow because you have made a good decision. As a helper, your consciousness grows. But if you try to heal out of your big ego, you are not helpful and you do not grow. If you heal with empathy and compassion, you grow. When you heal, it is a personal practice. You learn to control your consciousness. And how do you do it? Just do it. Focusing is important. You constantly improve your practice. Interacting with others always improves your consciousness and theirs. Simply let your intuition guide you. If you want to heal, to satisfy your ego, it will not happen. Your intellect does not heal. It does not know the answer to your question. You can never harm anyone. To be a healer, we must be very sensitive. One can heal from stillness and silence. Quote end. Larger conscious system described by Campbell contains all information, as I said. When we heal, we influence the future probability distribution. Future courses of disease are softened or stopped. Tom is explaining further on how to heal. Quote, your healing intention is much more powerful when it does not come from your intellect level, but from your being level. This is very important. An intention from the intellect level is only a wish. It is somewhat effective, but not enough. This is essential. The intention must come from a deeper inner level. Some call it the heart or the inner core. Tom calls it the being level. Interestingly, all decisions you make in dreams come from the being level. Those who are thinking and acting are dominated by the left hemisphere tend to be in the intellect level. They are head-driven. They will ask, what is the being level? If I'm not thinking, everything is empty. How am I supposed to achieve anything then? If your right hemisphere largely guides your life, you have no difficulty understanding action from the being level. You are mostly there anyway. By the way, your emotions also come from your being level, from your right brain. When healing, we should focus more on our feelings than our thinking. Visions that come from feeling are healing. All our energy must be directed towards this one act of healing. Direct your powerful beam of light onto the diseased area. And then let it go. Don't try to do it. Stay very casual. End quote. The great consciousness space, larger consciousness system, is the actual reality. Everything that arises from there is therefore virtual reality. We heal virtual reality. And only for this reason does healing succeed. I was always unsure whether one should think only on the intellectual level and whether the work on the being level should take place without thoughts and emotions. So during our retreat with Tom and our scholars of Tom in Madrid last May, I asked Tom directly, is thinking as well on the being level? So he said, at the being level you can think. Thinking is not just for the intellect. The being level also thinks. But it thinks a little differently. It thinks more intrusively. It does not think so much logically. You can think of giving more direction. I want to heal Mary or John and so on. What you should not do is to judge, to analyze, or do any assessment. You are just on the being level, focusing on the intent to heal. Another practice you can do is to jump between the intellect level and the being level. Neither one will disturb the practice. For beginners, I recommend staying on the intrusive state. I call it, I mentioned it already, I call it click, clack, thinking, not thinking, feeling, not feeling, intellect level, being level. I asked further on Tom during the Madrid meeting, Tom, the healing may work or it may not work. What are the reasons why it may not work? Tom says, quote, there are multiple reasons. Commonly, the illness they have is important to their own growth. They created that problem on their own choices, and they need to experience the consequences. Being ill is another experience that you must feel with this illness and grow up. You will find it more difficult, if not impossible. If you are a strong healer, you may heal a bit, but the illness may come back. They will find a way to come back in that same situation because that's a situation they are creating. What I do to discover in the beginning is what the situation here is. Is it something that needs healing? Or is it something that needs to be left alone? This is very important. I try to find out before I start healing. If it's just a random thing that is at the wrong place at the wrong time, like an infection, that is easy to heal. If it's something they have created out of anger or are upset about their life, that's more difficult to heal. It is something they need to experience. You can force the healing on them. Some feel guilty for that, what they have done in the past. Talk with them, have a sort of lesson. By supporting them, they may finish the process. You cannot take these bad experiences away from them. They resist the healing, so be careful. Click, clack, click, clack. At the end of his answers to my question, he called out to the hall, poor left-brainers. It's difficult for them to do it, but they can learn. I come now to the Campbell-Lipton dialogue, which named two scientists see the same world, which is a good support for my paper here for the messages included. Campbell, quote, consciousness is one of the deepest roots to physics. Consciousness is it where it all starts. Consciousness is the super system, if you will. Consciousness is the big picture. Consciousness is the computer that creates virtual reality. And information is transmitted at the speed of light. Particles are probability distributions. Why? We don't know. Consciousness is a digital information field. Consciousness is a digital information field. From that it arises a virtual reality, mind-influenced matter. Highly evolved consciousness is love. End quote. Bruce Lipton is adding, quote, I used to teach genetic determinism. That was wrong. We are not machines. We do not choose our genes, and we will not change them. But we are also no victims of our genes. We should not hand ourselves over to modern medicine, because then we give up our self-determination. The cell is a programmable chip. We can program the chip. Identical stem cells develop differently in different environments. On the cell membrane are sitting antennas that can receive and send information. We are energy transmitters and energy receivers. A lack of information leads to disorder and thus to illness. Fear increases disorder. Love creates order and healing. Entropy sinks. As long as information flow works, we are healthy. We communicate through energy. Illness is a lack of energy. End quote. Of course, one can also use the instruments of energy and information medicine, and in addition, greatly strengthen healing with impulses from consciousness actuality. This is my credo. This is my belief. David Sinclair, a professor at Harvard, is researching on longevity, and he says if you're getting old, it's a lack of vital information, or if you're getting ill, lack of information. He says epigenetics is key, very similar to Bruce Lipton. By providing the correct information, one can rejuvenate aged cells and transform cancer cells back into healthy cells. He called this the reset of the cell. It's very promising what's done there. Before I've met Eugen Winchevsky, I had already studied molecular oncology and learned a great deal from Dr. Bert Stephan, good friend of mine, who measured gene expressions in his institute in Hamburg called Metavectum. Together with these two colleagues, I wanted to explore the question, do ECT, the electrocancer treatment, and PAPIMI, an ion induction method, influence gene expression in cancer patients? And these two friends agreed, and we started a research program. The modulation of gene expression is, in the end, a form of epigenetic information medicine, isn't it so? Here too, it's about influencing data streams, just as Campbell designed. Only this supported by ECT and PAPIMI. Now, what is ECT? Using several electrically insulated special needles or surface electrodes, a voltage field is created inside the tumor. This depolarizes the tumor cell membrane. Healthy cells can be imagined as a kind of fortress that do not allow the weak current to pass. And cancer cells, on the other hand, offer almost no resistance. Since electric current always follows the path of least resistance, the current flows only through the tumor, leaving healthy tissues practically unaffected. The tumor cells are destroyed. Healthy cells have a membrane potential of 70 millivolt. Tumor cells membrane potential about 10, low resistance. And this is, my dear friends, a very helpful image for patients, something that they can believe in. So this is the effect. The destruction only is on the tumor side. In Germany, tumor diagnostics and therapies have traditionally focused almost exclusively on gene mutations rather than gene expressions. Now it comes a little bit more up that gene expressions are determined. Yet gene expressions is exactly where both information medicine and epigenetics act, and where modalities like ECT, PAPIMI, and consciousness-based interventions may converge. What is the method which we used? Well, real-time PCR was used to analyze cells isolated from peripheral blood and quantify the expressions of therapy-relevant genes. This method allows the detection of epithelial cells, which are important for assessing therapy sensitivities. Gene expressions, my dear friends, provides information about transcription. That means the blueprint for protein production, including that in tumor cells. In the first case, we examined the blood of a prostate cancer patient before and after PAPIMI and ECT treatment, which Eugen Winchevsky, as always, applied with consciousness support. We measured 90 gene expressions. The relevant ones were PAI1, TGF-beta, and TNF. This is the plasminogen activator inhibitor, the PAI, the transforming growth factor beta, TGF-beta, and the tumor necrosis factor, TNF. The results surprised us all and confirmed that we are on the right track with our research, investigating the effect of PAPIMI and ECT on reducing gene expressions in tumor therapy. PAI1 decreased from 144 to 43. TGF-beta decreased from 18 to 3.1. And TNF, the tumor necrosis factor, from 4,487 to 1,145. Of course, there are chemicals, substances to reduce these expressions, but they have all side effects. But if we use these methods like ECT and PAPIMI, we have no side effects. To date, I'm not aware of any scientific publications reporting such an investigation and results with direct relevance to tumor therapy. Therefore, our findings of last year maybe represent first-time publications at the conference. However, these results are not yet, of course, statistically robust, as they are based only on a single case. A larger study with a broader data set is still required. It is currently unclear whether tumor cells arise from poor nutrition, decades of systemic acidification, chronic inflammation, stress, psychological strains, and whether these factors then trigger specific gene expressions, or the other side, whether the epigenetic alterations in gene expressions occur first, leading to the tumor formation. Bert Stephan believes that both pathways are happening. So what I learned from my teachers as far as healing with conscious polarity is concerned. My first teacher was Carl Friedrich Dürker. He was based on Zen Buddhism, death psychology of C.G. Jung, and Christian mysticism of Master Eckhart. And these three pillars are still my three pillars. For him, the meaning of life was to practice and learn transparency for the immanent transcendence. Transparency for the immanent transcendence. The immanent transcendence is the consciousness actuality. Human beings have a double origin, what he said, a word ego and a true essence. The true essence is the way in which the transcendent being manifests itself in us and through us in the world. And the transcendent being is another expression for consciousness actuality. How this can be achieved? By meditation, Aikido, Kyoto, and so on. My teacher for spirituality was Williges Jäger, the Zen teacher. Zazen was the meditation on nothing, or the nothingness, called Zazen. I practiced that for many decades. In Buddhism we say, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. That means that every form is coming out of emptiness, and the form may be switched over into emptiness as well. This is the ever-acting process. This is the larger conscious system. This is what I explained already from different perspectives. Now, how can we, according to Buddhism and meditation, experience this reality? I quote Daio Kokoshi, born in 1231. There's a reality, even prior to heaven and earth. Indeed, it has no form, much less a name. Eyes fail to see it. It has no voice for ears to detect. To call it mind or Buddha violates its nature. For it that then becomes like a visionary flower in the air. It's not mind nor Buddha. Absolutely quiet and yet illuminating in a mysterious way, it allows itself to be perceived only by the clear-eyed. It is Dharma truly beyond form and sound. It is Tao, having nothing to do with words. Wishing to entice the blind, the Buddha has playfully let words escape his golden mouth. Heaven and earth are ever since filled with entangling brass. All my good worthy friends gathered here and maybe listening to my speech, if you desire to listen to the thunderous voice of the Dharma, exhaust your words, empty your thoughts, for then you may come to recognize this one essence. I learned a lot from my friend Walter Schwery, who died already, unfortunately, and he was an expert in death psychology of C.G. Jung for 10 years. And one statement by Carl Gustav Jung has strongly confirmed my present topic. Quote, in my decades of experience, Carl Gustav Jung said, in my decades of experience as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, after careful analysis, I have not found any single patient whose illness was not caused by a disconnection from the numinous. By this he meant all psychological psychosomatic illnesses, but perhaps are all chronic diseases. What is the numinous? The numinous refers to an experience that transcends consciousness. Jung saw the numinous as the expression of encountering the collective unconscious. In my terminology, this corresponds to the actuality consciousness. Franz Alt, who has written a book called The Healing Power is Within Us, I quote Franz Alt of this book, many people long for healing. They suffer from physical and mental illnesses, but also from conflicts and tensions in coping with everyday's life. No one is without suffering as long as they drift in the chaotic stream of life, says Jung. For him, psychic suffering is primarily associated with the lack of meaning in life. Those who seek healing must therefore be willing to engage with questions of meaning. Being on the path of healing, according to Jung, means becoming conscious and undergoing of a lifelong development toward wholeness. And for therapists who want to act as healers, it applies only what only truly is as healing power. Hans-Peter Dürr, the quantum physicist, who was a friend of mine, was speaking of the ever-acting process, which can be influenced by us in case of healing. His method was trying to make living more lively by what he called the loving dialogue with another person, the loving dialogue of a healer with the patient, to make his living more lively. That's what I learned from him. Let me summarize. From my own experiences and conversations with doctors, patients, and scientists, I can conclude that disease is essentially an information disorder within the cellular system of the human body. Healing therefore requires restoring the flow of information. This can be achieved through information-embedded matter, supply of energy, information impulses. These interventions increase the probability that the individual can self-heal. The consciousness of both the patient and the healer plays a crucial role. It is consciousness polarity, as I've called it, that amplifies the effectiveness of all therapeutic measures. The two poles, consciousness reality, consciousness actuality. The healer should learn to open himself to the actuality of consciousness. Only then, and perhaps only then, can they influence the flow of information for healing. We must take the patient along on their spiritual journey towards healing. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, you are all exceptionally well positioned in our society for the task. for this task. Healing with consciousness polarity. Perhaps more than ever before, you stand at the forefront of knowledge about illness and healing. Never before has medicine been so fertilized by the natural sciences. The science of the future will increasingly confirm your and our insights. What is crucial is the physician's mindful attention, accompanied by empathy and compassion. Only in this way can we bring patients along on their spiritual healing journey. Every illness is an invitation for both, for the doctor and the patient, to spiritual growth. The physician must also learn to feel the healing. In doing so, we send signals that positively influence cellular chemistry. In this way, the patient also learns to feel the healing. Let me quote Karl Rahner. What he said, the human being of the future will be mystic, or they will not exist at all. May I change this quote, this citation, when I say the human beings of the future will remain healthy and heal themselves through consciousness, or they will not exist at all. I want to encourage you. Our patients will increasingly articulate their own healing. Continue your work for the benefit of your patients, and do not let yourself to be held back by those, my dear friends, who well-meaning are stuck in materialistic, object-focused consciousness and have not yet begun a path for inner growth. We cannot blame them, because opening to the actuality of consciousness is not easy. We can practice, but this opening is always a grace. The more a person develops internally, the more they can heal. Become the change that Mahatma Gandhi demands. Here's the original quote. Be the change you want to see in the world. I thank you very much for listening to my reflections and my experiences on consciousness polarity.